In the history of Western literature, few names have been as thoroughly misunderstood as Jane Eyre. For over 2 centuries, Hollywood and mainstream narratives have continuously adapted it into an exquisite, sugar-coated Victorian romance. On screen, Jane appears pale and submissive, while Rochester is the swoon-worthy brooding patriarch. But if you, standing here in 2026, still view this as a dated tale of a billionaire alpha rescuing a destitute governess, it only proves that you have never truly read between the lines to decode Charlotte Bronté's hidden rage and rebellion. This is not a hymn to romantic love. It is a hardcore survival manifesto detailing how a woman clenches her teeth to guard her personal agency and spiritual boundaries. Within the meat grinder of patriarchy, class, and religion, today let us strip away those cliché romantic filters. Armed with the scalpels of modern psychology and feminist critique, it's time to re-examine this badass protagonist who took a horribly rigged hand and forced her own destiny to change. Puny, pale, and plain, she is viewed by her Aunt Reed's family as a useless parasite, a human punching bag for her tyrannical cousin John. The first major climax arrives in one of the most famous Gothic horror tropes in Western literature. The Red Room. After daring to fight back against her abuser, Jane is locked inside the cold, gloomy chamber where her uncle passed away. Here, panic and a brush with mortality manifest as mental vipers, literally shocking her into a state of catatonic trauma. According to the strict codes of her era, a low-born woman was expected to avoid conflict and learn submissive compliance. Yet right here, Brontë delivers an incredibly ahead-of-its-time declaration. A victim's anger is not only legitimate, but it is also the ultimate weapon for self-preservation. Once her fever breaks, Jane completely tears down the facade of Victorian maternal benevolence. Staring dead into her aunt's eyes, she sneers, "You are deceitful. If people ask how you treated me, I will tell them the exact bloody truth. I will never forgive you as long as I live." In the final act, when Aunt Reed lies paralyzed on her deathbed, Jane returns. Yet she refuses to offer any cheap, Hollywood-style toxic forgiveness. She simply watches her abuser die in peace. Through this childhood rupture, Jane draws her very first boundary. Harm is harm. Rejecting toxic reconciliation is the ultimate form of psychological clarity. To purge this black sheep, her aunt exiles Jane to Lowood School, a grim institution that masks systemic torment under the banner of charity. Its conditions mirror a modern-day concentration camp: burnt, rancid porridge for breakfast, a greasy slush of rotten potatoes and spoiled meat for lunch, and older girls bullying a young Jane to steal her meager ration of bread. In the biting cold of the valley, the girls have no winter boots. Their feet thaw in the slush, and their hands rot with chilblains. Soon, a horrific typhus epidemic ravages the campus, turning the school into a bleak mortuary. Jane's soulmate, Helen Burns, draws her final breath in Jane's arms, turning into a cold corpse under the very same blanket. While Helen teaches her endurance and spiritual vastness, the headmistress, Miss Temple, offers a maternal sanctuary of reason and justice. Emerging from this wasteland of death and deprivation, Jane morphs into a fierce survivalist. Like a starving predator, she devours French, drawing, science, and literature. She sees right through the true intent of Victorian female education, which was merely to domesticate girls into the passive angel in the house. Instead, Jane subverts these tools of taming, weaponizing them into leverage for economic survival. 8 years later, with full plumage, she abruptly rejects the comfort zone of institutional safety and places a job advertisement in the newspaper. She voices the loudest feminist rallying cry of her century. Women are supposed to be very calm generally, but women feel just as men feel. And it is narrow-minded to say that they ought to confine themselves to making puddings and knitting stockings. Armed with her raw intellectual capital, Jane steps out single-handedly into the uncharted social crucible. At Thornfield Hall, Jane encounters one of the most fascinating yet hazardous blueprints of toxic masculinity in Western canon, Mr. Rochester. Through a modern, intersectional lens, we must confront the endless parade of red flags hanging all over Rochester. He is legally bound to another woman, lives a hedonistic lifestyle across Europe, harbors a volatile temper, and even goes so far as to use another aristocratic lady to orchestrate cruel emotional blackmail against Jane. It is a suffocating psychological chokehold. Facing the crushing weight of class and gender privilege, Jane unleashes her anarchist manifesto on that storm-swept twilight. Shattering the glass ceiling of Victorian society, do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart. It is my spirit that addresses your spirit, just as if both had passed through the grave and we stood at God's feet equal. as we are. Unarmed by her fierce, unyielding stance, Rochester drops his mask of arrogance, drops to his knees, and begs for her hand. But Brontë refuses to let the story devolve into a cheap melodrama. On the very day of their wedding, the shocking truth is exposed. Rochester's wife, Bertha Mason, is alive and locked away in the attic. Modern literary critics have long pointed out a profound truth. The mad woman in the attic is not Jane's antagonist. She is Jane's doppelganger. Bertha represents the absolute psychological annihilation of a woman stripped of her identity and imprisoned by patriarchal marriage. If Jane nods her head today, accepting the role of Rochester's mistress in some lavish villa in southern Europe, she is merely signing up to be the next Bertha in the attic. Rochester cries, attempting an ultimate act of gaslighting. "If you leave me, you destroy me." Faced with her great love on one side and an abyss on the other, Jane exhibits a godlike resolve. She deploys the ultimate defense of self-preservation. "The more solitary, the more friendless, the more unsustained I am, the more I will respect myself." Without taking a single penny, in an act of absolute psychological minimalism, she walks out into the night. She would rather starve to death on the moors than reduce her sacred body and mind into a man's possession. Fleeing Thornfield, Jane experiences total social death. She loses her luggage, wanders aimlessly through the barren wilderness, and is reduced to begging a little girl for the leftover scraps meant for pigs. She has hit the absolute rock bottom of human physical survival. But true queens do not die in the ruins. She is rescued by the St. John siblings. Yet the final boss of subtle oppression soon arrives. St. John, her cousin, is an icy, physically flawless religious zealot. Standing on the absolute moral high ground of God, faith, and the Grand Crusade, St. John demands Jane's hand in marriage. Not for love, but because he covets her fierce competence as a tool for his missionary work in India. This is a spiritual pua far more insidious than Rochester's financial bait. St. John tells her, "If you refuse me, you are refusing God. Your soul is selfish and fallen." A traditional woman, brainwashed by colonial piety or moral anxiety, would have succumbed to self-sacrifice. But Jane's mind is now entirely demoralized from patriarchal guilt. She pierces straight through the core of this noble marriage. It is nothing short of spiritual castration. She rejects him with hardcore finality. She can withstand the material lure of the bourgeoisie, and she can see right through the white male conscription of female labor. She requires no grand sacred title to validate her existence. Her will must belong entirely to herself. Answering the call of her inner desire, financially free and spiritually maxed out, Jane returns to Thornfield. Brontë treats us to no cheap cliché of a rich woman rescuing her broken ex. Thornfield has been reduced to a charred, blackened ruin. The madwoman, Bertha, leaped from the roof, burning down the fortress of patriarchal oppression in a magnificent act of self-immolation. And Rochester, while trying to save everyone, was left blind, maimed, bankrupt, and drifting in isolation. In the misty seclusion of Ferndean, Jane finds him, the once mighty patriarch, who formerly held every crushing advantage of gender and class, has been effectively castrated by the fires of fate. The once defenseless orphan girl returns from above, packing an immense fortune and a completely matured will. This is no traditional happy ending. This is a total, radical reshuffling of power dynamics. Their union is completely stripped of 19th century utility, reproduction, and socioeconomic hierarchy. In the final chapter, Jane writes, "I have now been married 10 years. I know what it is to live entirely for and with what I love best on earth. To be together is for us to be at once as free as in solitude, as gay as in company." Modern feminists celebrate this ending because it is void of exploitation and dependency. It is a profound, mutual salvation built upon the ruins, achieved by two entirely free individuals. 2 centuries have passed. In 2026, amid the intersection of modern psychology, feminism, and hyper-awareness, why do we still need Jane Eyre? Because with the sharpest stroke of her pen, Charlotte Brontë shatters the gender myth of rescue and dependence. She hurls a hardcore survival law at every woman across every era. Do not wait for a Prince Charming, for his attic may hold the hidden madness of his past. Do not surrender to the grand, holy names of duty, for they may just be a front to colonize your body. Never give up your knowledge and skills for a fleeting sense of comfort, and never, for anyone, cross the boundary line of your own dignity. The true echo of Jane Eyre is not a cheesy love confession. It is the rebellious declaration of a pale little girl shouting back at an oppressive empire. In a world running on manipulation and systemic restraint, you want to win real freedom and a genuine soulmate? Too bad. You must first be like Jane, guard your boundaries, grow wildly in the dark, and force yourself to become an absolutely independent, untamable force of nature.